What was he doing in class? How had he gotten here? He remembered getting up in the morning but not getting dressed or coming to school. He had no idea what had happened between waking up at home and now. You may check your answers before turning in the math papers. What math papers? He had no idea what was going on, but he decided if she asked him why he didn't have his math, he'd tell her he forgot it or lost it outside. He'd have to tell her something. He opened his book and stared in disbelief. There was a test paper with all the answers written in, to all 50 problems. He noticed that it wasn't his handwriting, similar, but as if it had been written very quickly. He'd often found papers in his possession and just assumed they were his. But he knew there was no way in the world someone as bad as he was in math could have done those problems. He peeked over at the desk next to his and saw a girl working on the same test. He shrugged, picked up a pencil and wrote, Bill Milligan at the top. He had no intention of checking it. How could he double-check the answers if he didn't know how to work the problem? Are you finished already? He looked up and saw the teacher standing over him. Yeah. You mean you didn't check your answers? Nope. Do you have that much confidence you're going to pass this test? I don't know, Billy said. Only way to find out is to grade it. She took the test paper up to her desk, and a few seconds later he saw the frown on her face. She walked back to his seat. Let me see your book, Billy. He handed it to her, and she leafed through it. Let me see your hands. He showed her his hands. Then she asked to see his shirt cuffs and the contents of his pockets and the inside of his desk. Well, she said finally, I don't understand. There is no way you could have the answers, because I just ran the test off on the mimeograph this morning, and the only answers are in my purse. Did I pass? Billy asked. She gave him back his paper reluctantly. You got a perfect score. Billy's teachers called him truant, troublemaker, liar. From 4th to 8th grade he was in and out of offices of advisors, the principal, the school psychologist. Growing up was a constant battle of making up the stories, bending the truths, manipulating explanations to avoid admitting that most of the time he didn't know what had happened to him days, hours, even just minutes ago. Everyone noticed his trances, everyone said he was strange. When he came to understand that he was different from other people, that not everyone lost time, that everyone around him agreed he had done and said things he and he alone couldn't recall, he assumed he was insane. He hid it. Somehow he kept the secret. It was in the spring of 1969, the teacher recalled, when Billy was 14 and in 8th grade, that Chalmer took him to the farm, out beyond the cornfield, handed him a shovel and told him to start digging. Dr. Stella Caroline was later to describe this alleged event in her statement read into the court record. His stepfather abused Billy sexually and threatened to bury him alive if he told his mother. He even buried the child, leaving a pipe over his face for air. Before he shoveled the dirt off the child, he urinated through the pipe onto the child's face. From that day, Danny feared the earth. He would never again lie in the grass, touch the ground, or paint the landscape. Several days later, Billy went into his room and reached over to switch on his bedside lamp. Nothing happened. He clicked it again and again. Still nothing. He shuffled out to the kitchen, got a new bulb, and came back to change it as he had seen his mother do. He got a shock that sent him back against the wall. Tommy opened his eyes and looked around, not knowing what to expect. He saw the light bulb on the bed, picked it up, peered under the lampshade, and started to screw it in. As he touched the metal collar, he got a shock. Son of a bitch, what the hell was that? He pulled off the lampshade and looked into the hole. He touched it and felt the shock again. He sat there trying to puzzle it out. Where was the shit coming from? He followed the electric cord to where it plugged into the wall. He pulled out the plug and touched the collar again. Nothing. So the goddamn shock was coming from the wall. He stared into the two little holes, then jumped up and ran downstairs. He followed the wires from the ceiling to the fuse box, followed the cable from the fuse box outside the house, and stopped in amazement as he saw the lines leading to the telephone poles along the street. So that's what those goddamn things were for. Tommy followed the poles to see where they led to. It was nearly dark when he found himself outside the building with a wire fence around it and the sign Ohio Power. Okay, he thought, so where do they get the stuff that lights the lights and shocks the shit out of you? Back home he got out the phone book, looked up Ohio Power, and wrote down the address. It was too dark now, but tomorrow morning he would go there and see where the power came from. The next day, Tommy went downtown to Ohio Power. He walked inside and stared dumbfounded. Just a lot of people sitting at desks, answering telephones and typing. A business office. Jesus Christ, struck out again. As he wandered along the main street trying to figure out how he was going to find out where this junk came from, he passed the library sign in front of the municipal building. Okay, he'd go look it up in the books. He went up the second floor, searched the card catalog under Power, found the books and began to read. It astonished him to learn about dams, hydroelectric powers, and the burning of coal and other combustible fuels to create energy to work machinery and light the lights. He read until dark, then he wandered the streets of Lancaster, looking at all the lights that had been turned on, excited that now he knew where the power was coming from. He was going to learn all about those machines and everything that had to do with electricity. He stopped in front of a store window and looked at the display of electronic equipment. A crowd had gathered around the TV sets in the window, and they were watching the man in the space suit climb down a ladder. "Can you believe it?" someone said. "Seeing this all the way from the moon." "One giant step for mankind," the voice from the TV was saying. Tommy looked up at the moon and then back at the TV screen. There was something else he had to learn about. Then he saw a woman's reflection in the window. Dorothy said, "Billy, you'd better come on home now." He looked up at Billy's pretty mother and started to tell her that his name was Tommy, but she put her hand on his shoulder and led him to the car. "You got to stop this wandering around downtown, Billy. You got to be home before Chal gets back from work, or you know what will happen." All the way back in the car, Dorothy kept looking at him sideways, as if trying to size him up, but he kept quiet. She gave Tommy something to eat, and then she said, "Why don't you just go in and do some painting, Billy? You know that always settles you down. You look so edgy." He shrugged and went into the room where the art supplies were. With quick strokes, he painted a night scene of a road with telephone poles. When he was done, he stood back and looked at it. Pretty damn good for a beginner. The next morning he got up early and painted a landscape with the moon showing, even though it was a day scene. Billy loved flowers and poetry and helping his mother around the house, but he knew that Chalmer called him a sissy and a little queer, so he stopped helping his mother and writing poetry. Adelana came to do them for him in secret. One evening, Chalmer settled down to watch a World War II movie in which a Gestapo interrogator beat his victim with a hose. When the movie was over, Chalmer went out into the yard and cut a 4-foot length of garden hose, doubled it and wrapped the cut ends together with black tape for a handle. When he came inside, he saw Billy washing the dishes. Before she knew what was happening, Adelana felt a blow in the small of her back that knocked her to the floor. Chalmer hung the hose by the looped end on his bedroom door and went to bed. Adelana learned that men were violent and hateful and never to be trusted. She wished Dorothy or one of the girls, Katie or Chala, would hug her and kiss her and make the fear and the bad feelings go away. But she knew that would cause trouble, so she went to bed and cried herself to sleep. Chalmer used that hose often, mostly on Billy. Dorothy recalled hanging her robe or nightgown over it on the back of the bedroom door, hoping that if Chalmer didn't see it, he wouldn't use it. Then, one day, after he hadn't used it for a long time, She threw it away. He never did know what had happened to it. In addition to secretly playing with motors and electrical equipment, Tommy began to study methods of escape. He read about the great escape artists Houdini and Sylvester, and was disappointed to discover that some of their great escapes were tricks. In later years, Jimbo remembered his brother telling him to tie his hands tightly with a rope and then to leave. When Tommy was alone, he would study the knots and figure out the easiest way to turn his wrists to make them mobile, so that the ropes would slide. He practiced tying one wrist with a rope and then untying it with his hand behind his back. After reading of African monkey traps used to capture the animals when they reached through narrow slots for food and were then unable to pull their fists free because they wouldn't let go, Tommy began to think about the structure of the human hand. He studied the encyclopedia pictures of bone structure, and it occurred to him that if the hand could be compressed smaller than the wrist, it could always get free. He measured his own hands and wrists and began a series of exercises, squeezing and conditioning his bones and joints. When he finally reached the point of being able to compress his hands smaller than his wrists, he knew that nothing could ever again keep him in harness or chains. Tommy decided he also needed to know how to get out of locked rooms. When Billy's mother was out and he was alone in the house, he got a screwdriver and unscrewed the lock plate of the door, studying the mechanism to see how it worked. He drew a picture of the inside of the lock and memorized the shapes. Whenever he saw a different lock, he would take it apart, study it, and put it back together. One day, he wandered downtown into the shop of a locksmith. The old man let him look at the different kinds of locks to memorize how they worked. He even lent Tommy a book about magnetic and woke tumblers, spinner-type tumblers, and different kinds of bolts. Tommy studied hard, testing himself constantly. At the sporting goods store, he saw handcuffs and decided that as soon as he had the money, he would get a pair to learn how to unlock those as well. One evening, when Chalmer was particularly nasty at dinner, Tommy searched for a way he could hurt him without getting caught. He had an idea. He got a file from the toolbox, took the cover of Chalmer's electric rotary razor, and carefully filled all 3 rotary blades dull. Then he put the cover back on and went out. Next morning he stood outside the bathroom while Chalmer was shaving. He heard the click of the razor and then the shouts of pain as the dull blades yanked at the hairs instead of cutting them. Chalmer raced out of the bathroom. "What are you looking at, you stupid bastard? Don't stand there like a goddamn moron." Tommy shoved his hands into his pockets and walked off, turning his head away so Chalmer wouldn't see him smiling. Alan's first time out on the spot was when he tried to talk some neighborhood tough guys out of throwing him down into the construction site hole dug for the foundation of a building. He argued with them using all of his conman abilities, but it didn't work. They tossed him down into the pit anyway and threw rocks at him. Well, he figured, no use in sticking around. Then he heard the clunk of the rock hitting the ground in front of him. Then another one, and another. He looked up to see the gang of boys at the top of the excavation tossing rocks at him. One hit him in the leg and another hit his side. Then he ran to the far end, going in circles, trying to find a way out. Finally, realizing the sides were too steep for him to climb, he sat down in the dirt and crossed his legs. Tommy looked up when a rock hit him in the back. Quickly sizing up the situation, he realized an escape was called for. He had been practicing picking locks and untying ropes. This needed strength. Reagan got to his feet, pulled out his pocket knife and stormed up the incline toward the boys, flicking open the knife, looking from one of the bullies to the other, holding his anger in control, waiting to see which one would jump him. He had no hesitation about stabbing any of them. They had picked on someone a foot shorter than they were, but they had not expected him to confront them. The boys scattered and Reagan walked home. Jimbo later recalled that when the parents of the boys complained that Billy had threatened their sons with a knife, Chalmer listened to their side of it, took Billy out back, and beat him. Dorothy knew that her youngest son had changed and was acting strangely. Billy wasn't Billy at times, she recalled later. He was moody, he was off to himself. I would say something to him and he wouldn't answer me, like he was far off and thinking about it, staring into space. He would go wandering downtown like he used to when he would sleepwalk. He would do it from school. Sometimes if they caught him in school before he had a chance to wander off, they would keep him and call for me to come and get him. Sometimes he'd just leave and they'd call me. I'd go looking for him everywhere, find him wandering downtown and bring him home. And I'd say to him, "Okay, Billy, you go lay down." But that child didn't even know which direction his bedroom was. I'd go in there and I'd think, my God, well, how do you feel? I'd ask him when he'd wake up. He'd look real bewildered and say, "Did I stay home today?" And I'd say, "No, Billy, you did not stay home today. Don't you remember me coming after you? You were at school and Mr. Young called me and I come up to the school after you. Don't remember coming home with me?" He'd look dazed and nod and say, "Oh, don't you remember? I guess I just wasn't feeling well today." They tried to tell me it was drug-related, Dorothy said, but I knew it wasn't. That boy never took drugs. He wouldn't even take an aspirin. I'd have to fight him to take medicine. Sometimes he'd come home on his own, confused and in trace. He wouldn't talk to me until he had a nap. Then he'd come out and it would be my Billy Milligan again. I told everyone, that boy needs help. Arthur appeared in school occasionally to correct the teacher when they were studying world history, especially when the subject was England and the colonies. He spent most of his time in the Lancaster Public Library reading. There was more to be gained from books and first-hand experience than from these narrow-minded provincial teachers. The school teacher's explanation of the Boston Tea Party made Arthur angry. He had read the truth in a Canadian book called The Raw Facts, which debunked the phony patriotic explanation for what had really been a group of drunken sailors. But when Arthur spoke, everyone laughed, and he walked out of the class, leaving the sound of giggling behind him. He went back to the library, where he knew the pretty librarian wouldn't laugh at his accent. Arthur knew very well there were others around, because as he checked the dates on the calendar, he knew something was wrong. According to everything he read and observed, other people didn't sleep as long as he seemed to be sleeping. He began to question people. "What did I do yesterday?" He would ask Katie or Jim or Chella or Dorothy. Their descriptions of his behavior would be completely strange to him. He would have to check it out by logical deduction. One day, as he was about to sleep, he felt someone else's presence in his mind, and he forced himself to stay awake. "Who are you?" he asked. "I demand to know who you are." He heard the voice answer, "Well, who in the hell are you?" "My name is Arthur. Who are you?" "Tommy." "What are you doing here, Tommy?" "What are you doing here?" The questioning went back and forth in his mind. "How did you get here?" Arthur asked. "I don't know. Do you?" "No, but I've bloody well got to find out." "How?" "We must be logical about it. I have an idea. Let's you and I keep track of the time we're awake, to see if that accounts for all the hours of the day." "Hey, that's a good idea." Arthur said, "Make a mark inside the closet door for every hour you can account for. I'll do the same thing. We'll tally it up and check it with the calendar to see if all the time is accounted for." It wasn't. There had to be others. Arthur spent every conscious moment working out the puzzle of the missing time and searching for other people who seemed to be sharing his mind and body. After meeting Tommy, one by one he discovered all the others, a total of 23, including himself and the one the outside people referred to as Billy or Bill. He had learned through logical deduction who they were, how they behaved, and the things they did. Only the child called Christine to have been aware before Arthur of the existence of the others. She could, he learned, experience what went on in their minds when they were conscious. Arthur wondered if that was a skill that could be developed. He brought up the subject to the one called Alan, the manipulator, who was always there to fast-task himself out of a situation. Alan, next time you're holding the consciousness, I want you to think real hard and tell me everything that's going on around you. Alan agreed to try it, and the next time he found he was out, he told Arthur everything he saw. Arthur visualized it until it came into focus, and then, with a tremendous effort, he was able to see it through Alan's eyes. He discovered, however, that it worked only when he paid attention and when he was awake, even though not out in the consciousness. He had achieved his first intellectual triumph of mind over matter. Arthur realized that because of his knowledge, he had become responsible for a large diverse family. They were all involved with the same body, and something had to be done to create order out of what was proving to be a chaotic situation. Since he was the only one capable of handling the task unemotionally, he would put his mind to it and come up with something that would be fair, workable, and above all, logical. The kids at school teased Billy when he wandered around the halls in a daze. They saw him talking to himself, behaving at times like a little girl, and they picked on him. One cold afternoon during recess, some of the boys started taunting him in the schoolyard. Someone threw a rock at him, hitting him in the side. At first he didn't know what had happened, but he knew he wasn't permitted to show anger or Chalmer would punish him. Reagan turned and glared at the laughing boys. Another boy picked up a rock and threw it, but Reagan caught it and whipped it back, swiftly hitting the boy in the head. Astonished, the boys backed off as Reagan pulled a switchblade out of his pocket and approached them. They fled. Reagan stood looking around, trying to understand where he was and how he had come to be there. He closed the knife, put it into his pocket, and walked off. He had no idea what was going on. But Arthur observed him, his swiftness, his anger, and he deducted why Reagan was there. He realized that Reagan's sudden emotional outbursts would have to be dealt with, but it would be necessary to study and understand him before he introduced himself. What surprised him most of all was that Reagan was thinking in a Slavic accent. Arthur felt the Slavs had been the first barbarians. In dealing with Reagan, he was dealing with a barbarian. Dangerous, but the kind of person who might prove necessary in times of danger, a power to be harnessed. Arthur would bide his time and approach him when he felt it was right. Several weeks later, Kevin joined some tough boys in a dirt-clad fight against kids from another neighborhood. The battleground was a mound of dirt behind a big pit where a housing development was under construction. Kevin was feeling rough and tough, tossing the clods, laughing as he missed, watching them explode like dirt bombs. Then he heard a strange voice from somewhere beside him say, "Lova! Throw them lova!" He stopped and looked around, but no one was close by. Then he heard it again, "Lova! Lova! Throw them things lova!" It was a voice like the Brooklyn soldiers in the war movie he had seen on TV. "He should throw them dang doit clothes lova!" Kevin was baffled. He stopped throwing and sat down on the dirt pile to figure out who was talking to him. "Where are you?" Kevin asked. "Where are you?" echoed the voice. "I'm standing on the dirt behind the pit." "Yeah, me too." "What's your name?" Kevin asked. "Philip. What's yours?" "Kevin." "That's a funny name." "Yeah? I'd bust you if I could see you." "Where you live?" Philip asked. "On Spring Street. Where you from?" "I'm from Brooklyn, New York, but now I live in Spring Street too." "It's 933 Spring, a white house, owned by some guy named Chalmer Milligan," Kevin said. "He calls me Billy." "Geez, that's where I live. I know the same guy. He calls me Billy too. I ain't never seen you there." "I never seen you there either," said Kevin. "Well, shit, pal," Philip said. "Let's go bust out some windows at the school." "That's cool," Kevin said, and they ran down to the school and broke a dozen windows. Arthur listened and watched and decided that those two were definitely criminal types who could prove to be a very serious problem indeed. Reagan knew some of the other people who shared his body. He knew Billy, whom he had known from the beginning of his own consciousness. David, who accepted the pain. Danny, who lived in a constant fear. And 3-year-old Christine, whom he adored. But he knew there were others as well, many others he hadn't met. The voices and the things that happened couldn't be explained by just the 5 of them. Reagan knew his last name was Varaskovich, that his homeland was Yugoslavia, and that his reason for existence was to survive and to use any means to protect the others, especially the children. He was aware of his great strengths and his ability to sense danger as a spider feels the tingling presence of an intruder on his web. He was able to absorb all the others' fear and transform it into action. He vowed to train himself, perfect his body, study martial arts. But that was not enough in this hostile world. He went downtown to the local sporting goods store and bought a throwing knife. Then he went out to the woods and practiced pulling it quickly from his boot and tossing it into a tree. When it got too dark to see, he headed for home. Never again, he decided, as he slipped the knife back into his boot, would he be without a weapon. On the way home, he heard a strange voice with a British accent. He turned quickly, bending down and whipping out the knife. But there was no one there. "I'm in your head, Reagan Vedeskovich. We're sharing the same body." Arthur talked to him as they walked, explaining what he had discovered about the other people inside. "You are really in my head?" Reagan asked. "That's right." "And you know what I am doing?" "I've been observing you lately. I think you're very good with a knife, but you should not limit yourself to one weapon. In addition to the skills of the martial arts, you should learn about guns and bombs as well." "I am no good with explosives. I don't understand about all those wires and connections." "Tommy could specialize in that. The lad is good with electronics and mechanical things." "Who is Tommy?" "One of these days I'll introduce you. If we are to survive in this world, we'll have to bring some order out of this chaos." "What do you mean, chaos?" "When Billy wanders around and one person after another switches in front of people, starting things and not finishing them, getting into scrapes that the other have to do mental handsprings to get out of, I call that chaos. There's got to be a way to control things." "I don't like too much control," Reagan said. "The important thing," said Arthur, "is to learn to control events and people so that we can survive. That I place as the highest priority." "And next to highest?" "Self-improvement." "I agree," Reagan said. "Let me tell you about a book I read that explains how it's possible to control one's adrenaline, to channel it for maximum power." Reagan listened as Arthur described his readings in biology, especially his interest in the idea of harnessing fear and transforming it into energy by adrenaline and thyroid secretion. Reagan found himself annoyed at Arthur's assumption of superiority, but he could not deny that the Englishman knew a great deal he himself had never heard of. "You play chess?" Arthur asked. "Of course," said Reagan. "All right then. Pawn to King 4. Reagan thought a moment and answered. "Knight to Queen's Bishop 3. Arthur visualized the board and said, an Indian defense. Very good." Arthur won the game in every chance game they played after that. Reagan had to admit that when it came to mental concentration, Arthur was his superior. He consoled himself with the knowledge that Arthur couldn't fight if his life depended on it. "We will need you to protect us," Arthur said. "How you can read mind?" "A simple technique. You should be able to pick it up someday yourself." "Does Billy know about us?" "No. He hears voices from time to time and he sees visions, but he has no notion we exist." Should he not be told? I don't think so. I believe it would drive him insane.